Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Krickenberger, also known as Aaron of SIG Beard or SpiffXP on all the things. And you are at the Kubernetes SIG Testing bi-weekly meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 26th. This meeting is being publicly recorded, so we can all go to YouTube later and watch ourselves adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. Basically means we be our very best selves and not be jerks to each other. If you find you have a problem with our conduct during this meeting, please feel free to email conduct@kubernetes.io, or you are welcome to reach out to me privately as well. On today's agenda, we're going to start with a demo from Sean Chase to talk about a new test grid rendering feature for Kubernetes adjacent projects. And then I had a couple sub-project updates I wanted to discuss, and then we'll talk about sort of the work I think SIG Testing is committing to for the 121 Kubernetes release lifecycle and where we could use your help in accomplishing that. So I will hand it over to Mr. Demo Time in all caps, Sean Chase, after I make him a co-host so he can share his screen.
Thank you. I was just about to ask about that as I slowly panic about whether I have all the technical bits together I need. Let me see if I can present my screen. Oh, spoilers. Let's start on test grid. I have a bit of a demo here. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean. I'm on GitHub as ChaseS2, and I do a lot of work on test grid. We've very recently gotten to the point with test grid where we have enough of it open sourced that users can start creating their own test grid. And I wanted to give a quick demonstration on how that's done. More specific information is given in a README and in some links kind of at the end of the presentation, because I don't want to take everyone's time. This is test grid. For those of you who are just joining us, test grid is the tool that the Kubernetes community uses to put their tests in a grid. Here is technically a grid with some tests. They're all green. It's very good. But to get into how you can leverage this yourself, I would like to get into its architecture a little bit. Test grid has kind of two halves, a front end and a back end. The back end is, to be simple, a number of Kubernetes processes that are updating state and information in cloud storage, and the front end reads those that cloud information to display what you see. Let me see if I can pull up my notes.
Cloud storage being GCS?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
To be a bit more specific, this, like I believe Alvaro said, but anyway, this is, the cloud storage in question is GCS, and in particular, test grid needs three things to function. It needs a configuration proto that tells it where everything in test grid is. It needs a summary for each dashboard, for now named summary dashboard name, and it needs a grid for each test group to show what to display. Now, users and administrators aren't expected to deal with these. They're handled by an open source program that is located in test grid's repository. The config is maintained by a configurator, usually, which does have to be connected to a PROW instance. We're kind of working on other ways to generate those configurations. State is maintained by updater, and summary is maintained by summarizer. And as long as all of these controllers are kind of continuously running and updating protos, the information gets updated and it puts it into place so that the front end can display it. The front end currently isn't open source. But the front end has been extended to work for any GCS bucket that the App Engine account has permission to access. Going to a particular render endpoint that contains your bucket name in it will display the test grid located in that particular GCS bucket. So if you have your own GCS bucket and you would like to display the test grid contents of that GCS bucket, you can go to testgrid.k8s.io/r/the name of your bucket. This API is currently a work in progress. It's liable to change. Right now, it expects everything to be in the root of your bucket, and we don't like that. And changing that will probably change the API. Updates will be on Google Cloud Platform /testgrid in the READMEs there. Your bucket does need to have this user account able to read from it, because if it can't read your information, it can't display it. And if you have your own bucket, the data in it is maintained by presumably you running these controllers. If you don't want to maintain that data yourself, the Kate's instance is still around, and we have a number of tools to get your information there. That is it. Assuming that I'm displaying a screen and not a tab, here's a demonstration. This is test grid as we know it. The current Kate's instance, it shows everything. But I wanted to create my own bucket that showed just the jobs that I cared quite a lot about. So testgrid/r fadeabot only, we have a version of the config that's been pared down to just show fadeabot, and a script that's doing effectively what the summarizer and updater do. It's a little simpler for this mock, but the dashboard only shows what the configuration tells it to show. These results are accurate, though they're very old because I haven't run the updater in about 2 weeks. So this shows that it is indeed reading my config and is reading my current state with my artificially bad controller. But that's what this does. And me continuing to click around is just demoing test grid at this point. That is it. I think I was a little bit over 8 minutes, but I have some links, like I said, on Google Cloud Platform /testgrid. There's a walkthrough, and if there are any questions, please contact me. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Sean?
Are we able to link that slide deck in the notes or the agenda notes?
Sean has frozen for me, but I assigned.
Yes, let me get a link.
I assigned a thing to you on the meeting net, Sean. So I'll follow up with you afterwards. Okay. Make sure that's done. I guess my high-level question is this: you mentioned the API is subject to change at any time. This is very alpha. Would you recommend the Kubernetes community start trying to use this?
If you are currently have your tests on test grid, or if your tests are running on Kubernetes infrastructure, no, our current tooling is more than sufficient for that. If you are perhaps a Kubernetes adjacent team and have a lot of interest in setting up your own test grid, this is kind of what that's targeted for.
Okay.
I've heard kind of a lot of interest in we're glad test grid is open source. We'd like to try it for ourselves. And this is currently where we are with that project.
Okay. I'll ask it another way, maybe. There are a lot of items on the Kubernetes test grid instance right now related to Istio or Knative or our company-specific groups. Do we think we could go tell those people to move their stuff to different buckets, or should we wait on that?
Over time, I think that, like I said, this is an alpha. If we wanted to do that, like there would probably be some migration time to that, just because change is kind of tricky. But that is something we could do.
Cool. That sounds cool. Yeah, the number of SIG groups versus the number of non-SIG groups seems to be about equal right now. And I'd love for us to get back to the point where it's only like SIG dashboard groups, so then SIGs know what they're looking for.
Sorry, I'm really looking forward to reading the reference stuff you sent.
Sorry, could you say that again?
I just said I'm really looking forward to reading the links that Sean sent. Figure out more about how we might use this.
Awesome. Yeah, I tried to drop links to the code for the updater and the summarizer, which live over in the Google Cloud Platform test grid repo. The configurator, I believe, is currently still in Kubernetes test infra because it's tied to some Kubernetes isms, and also that's the thing that allows us to magically take some information out of proud job definitions and generate some further test grid config from that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Sean. Super excited about this.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to a couple sub-project updates. First, to talk about Kind, Ben, do you want to talk about what's going on with Kind these days? Ben remains muted. Okay. Well, the only key thing that I was aware of is that Amit Watvi and Antonio, who's on the call here, were just recently promoted to provers for at the root of the Kind repo, which to me means they are now also sub-project owners for Kind. I think this is a pretty big milestone to encourage sort of community maintenance and ownership of the Kind sub-project. And I guess I feel compelled to point out that Antonio does not work for Google. And I'm always happy to see non-Google, non-mono vendor owned sub-projects. So congrats to Antonio and Amit and Ben. Cool.
Yeah, we've been working towards this for a long while. It was mainly just Ben doing all the releases, but now Antonio and I can help.
That's really great news. Okay, next update is the Testing Commons sub-project. Testing Commons was a sub-project that was created a couple of years ago by Tim St. Clair to try and rally a group of people who were interested in how we could define best practices for all of the tests that live in the Kubernetes repo. And over the years, it's kind of had people come and go. It's sort of been like a volunteer-led best effort project or sub-project. And so after talking with the existing excuse me, leads of the sub-project, Andrew Kim and Jorge Alarcon, we've decided, or George Alarcon, we've decided to sort of move the project to more of a formal best effort basis. So we're gonna, since there's not often a lot of people showing up to the meeting and there's not often a lot of chatter related to it, we're planning on archiving the Testing Commons Slack channel and discontinuing the meetings. And instead, for people who are interested in talking about sort of best practices or how we could refactor the testing frameworks and stuff in use in Kubernetes, we encourage people to bring that up in the SIG testing meeting and the SIG testing Slack channel. So it's still going to exist as its own sub-project with a distinct set of owners. But it just doesn't seem like there's enough bandwidth available for people to commit to recurring meetings and things like that. And so it's more likely that you'll get responses if you raise these sorts of questions in this meeting or the SIG testing channel. Since this is sort of a change in the sub-project, I believe it needs to go through lazy consensus. So I'll send out an email related to this later today. Any questions or comments there? Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick, since Grant is here, is to just give Grant a bunch of kudos for the work that he's done on Kettle and improving the flakiness queries that we run against the data that Kettle ingests into BigQuery. So this is probably most interesting to people who are on the CI Signal team. But for a while now, we had a bunch of jobs that use this legacy thing called Bootstrap to run. And those jobs were getting picked up by our flakiness queries. But the jobs that did not use Bootstrap and only used pod utils, which is the recommended supported way of writing and running your prow jobs, those were not getting picked up. And they are now. And then further, we kind of took off the filtering of those queries. So today, I'm trying to find the thing so I can share my screen. Right, so today if you go to test infra and you click on the Flakes latest JSON file, you will see sort of over the past week, all of the jobs that we run in our infrastructure, which is a bunch. So not just the pre-submits, but also the CI jobs, sorted by which ones are the which ones are the flakiest, and then within those jobs, which tests are flaking. And we're no longer filtering out flakes that don't occur very often. We're tracking all the flakes. The reason I say this is relevant to CI Signal is this means we're now showing tests that flake for release blocking jobs. And we're also showing tests that flake for, oh boy, integration. There we go. So the integration tests used to be something that you could only see failing if you went to go.k8s.io/triage, which is sort of an alternate way of viewing test failures across the project. But if you just want to know like which are the flakes that are most impacting the project and we really want to get people working on these, you can use this file. So hopefully this is going to help us out as we look to the reliability working group to start tracking down like which SIGs have the flakiest tests, and let's make sure that they're addressing these problems. So kudos to Grant for putting that together. Yay. I'll stop my share there. We're also looking to move as much of this as we can on a best effort basis over to Kate's Infra community-owned infrastructure to eventually get to the point where community members feel comfortable writing and running their own queries against this same data set. You can do this today using like a free tier Google Cloud account. You can query up to a terabyte worth of data. But we're going to try and make it a little easier. And I think Grant showed last week how we're going to try and put all this visualized into Data Studio to empower community members to create their own dashboards or their own reports in Data Studio. Any questions there?
If I can just tack onto that real quick, I did create an issue if anybody wants to help out. GCS, where all of the kettle metrics are stored, or the metrics from metric slash in the repo, allows for static site hosting. And if anybody's interested in making those JSON metrics a little bit more human readable, and wants to build some static sites around adding search or anything to those, I created an issue and linked it in the meeting notes.
Awesome. Thanks, Grant. Yeah, I think it'd be cool if we could have like a go.kates.io/flakiest or whatever that just took you straight to a dashboard. That was helpful. As far as the other sub-projects go, I don't have any specific updates on them, but I did just want to point out the list of all the sub-projects that fall under this SIG. We're going to be reviewing all of these as we go through our annual reports to the steering committee. And I plan on adding a section, the future SIG testing meetings. So as with testing commons, those sub-projects that don't have meetings or Slack channels of their own, we can sort of revisit those and see if there's anything new worth talking about there. So things like updates to Boscos or updates to Prow that are of interest. Okay. So I'll move on from there. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the stuff I feel is important for us to accomplish in the 121 release lifecycle, which I'm roughly thinking of as this quarter. The release may move beyond that. I think that's still being sorted out. But I just sort of wanted to say we should get these things accomplished at the same cadence as the release, because I think they are impactful to the release. I will go ahead and share my screen so I can walk through this again. So I wanted to thank a number of folks from the release engineering team for showing up, because I think this is where there's sort of a lot of overlap between SIG testing and SIG release and the infrastructure that we use for the project. So Stephen created an issue that says registries used in Kubernetes CI should be on Kubernetes community infra. We identified this as a pain point last release cycle when one of the registries that was Google owned accidentally disappeared because it was not appropriately tagged as in use by the project. We've taken care of that, but to mitigate that risk going forward, we've also tried to identify all of the other Google-owned projects that host images that are used by Kubernetes CI. So I'll just walk through each of these. Some of these are of the form or like there is a test that uses an image that is hosted by google.com project. So authenticated image pulling is one of them. And basically, we will need help from the SIG that owns the test that uses this, which in this case is SIG node, to decide whether or not this test is still relevant as written. And if it is, how the credentials and stuff are set up, and then migrate this over to kates.gcr.io. Does anybody have any questions about sort of the steps that I've listed in the issue here? Okay. I'm not taking that as no questions. I'm taking that as we're all looking at this for the first time. So another example of a project is apparently we have a number of images that are used in the GKE release project. I identified this by using our Kubernetes code search tool, cs.k8s.io. And you can see here that it's referenced in things like the device plugins add-on. And there appears to be like a Windows specific pause image. And then there are a number of testing manifests that SIG storage uses where some of their CSI provisioner, attacher, resizer, and stuff, they're pulling all these from GKE release. And so what we need to do is to identify, do these images already exist over in community-owned repos? And if so, it's probably just a search replace and make sure that they use the new thing.
Regarding the pause image, we already added support to the pause image for Windows, and it has been published already and promoted. And there's a pull request open that will replace those strings and texts to the actual current pause image. I'm gonna link it in chat afterwards.
Okay, awesome. If you could comment on this GKE release issue, that would be cool too. Because I feel like, yeah, mechanically this should be pretty easy. It's just a matter of making sure like tests still pass. Kate's authenticated test is another example. So this was the one that sort of kicked all this off. This is an example of two tests that pull an image, and we should decide if the test as it's written makes sense, and if so, we should migrate the image over to kates.gcr.io. So I tried to sort of spec out what the credentials are for the image and stuff. I feel like release engineering can work in release engineering, or the release team can work in concert with SIG apps to decide like, does this test still make sense? And if so, let's get it using an image hosted on community infrastructure. Kubernetes Ci Images. So the build job, which is on the release, which is one of the release blocking jobs, builds both binary artifacts and container images for consumption by the rest of the community and CI jobs. Kubernetes Ci Images specifically is used by kubeadm and a couple other sub-projects, like indirectly through kubeadm, all the cluster API projects end up using this as well. Lubomir is here. Maybe you want to speak more to it, but I feel like Lubomir's pretty quickly identified what needs to change in kubeadm for this to happen. And if you haven't already made the changes to kubeadm, you're well on the way to making this happen for 121. Is that correct?
Yes, for 121, we're changing the CI image repository, but also we backported the change to the support SKU. That is a kubeadm change specifically. For cluster API, I also created a ticket so that they apply the change to their test scripts. I think more of a problem was the GCS bucket, but we already have a PR for that.
Okay.
I think in terms of sequence lifecycle, we are in a good shape for these changes.
Okay. That sounds great. So most likely the help that will be needed from release engineering is to make sure that once we are happy that kubeadm is no longer using images from this project, we don't need to worry about keeping images here up to date. And that should be one of the last remaining reasons why we're not fully relying on the build job that runs on community infrastructure and publishes to Kate's release dev instead of Kubernetes release dev. Let me see if I have a link to the relevant issue here. Not at the moment. I'll get there. But the bucket that Lubomir mentioned, Kubernetes release dev, it's going to be a broader effort that we need help with. But sticking just with container images. So another thing that CloudU has helped with a bunch, but I still think could use some more help, or we need some help pushing us over the line, is making sure that, we no longer use E2E test images that are hosted by google.com. CloudU?
Yeah, we have built and promoted, I think, all of the images. And I've also been testing them out with the press submit test to see if they are passing. We caught a couple of issues, for example, with the up armor loader image. And there's a pull request, that one, which basically will update the registry for those images to the promoted one. There's still a couple of images that will have to be added to this pull request. I've left a comment because those were not promoted when Ernest made that pull request, but it's fine. And there's actually one last image that I have no idea what to do about. It's the CUDA vector add image 1.0. For some reason, we use two versions of that image in testing, and there's even a test case which spawns a pod with two containers, one with each version for some reason, and I'm not particularly sure why or what to do about that. That's the only image that remains from that registry.
Do you know which SIG owns those tests?
No idea.
I am very hopeful that that test is tagged with a SIG name, because then I would suggest it's the SIG's responsibility. So what I would probably do is go ping the SIG in their Slack channel, or notify the SIG leads, assign the SIG leads to an issue about, hey, what's the deal with this? And if neither of those get their attention, you can always send something to the mailing list.
And yeah, so that's basically the last image. But regarding that registry and those images, I actually have one other pull request that we kind of need for SIG Windows. It's the one that adds support for Windows for the resource consumer image, which I've linked here in chat.
Okay.
Yeah, it was punted a couple of times because it is on the larger side, but we have been using this image and with those updates for a couple of releases already. In our testing, we've also run the HPA tests, and they've been passing, and I've also put a paste bin with a run I've run with that image. So after that, we can also promote that image for Windows as well. And I think with that, we'll be finished with this registry.
Awesome. However, as much as I appreciate everything that Claudia has done, and this should hopefully mostly be done, and I didn't actually write this in this issue, I'm so sorry. I feel like with pretty much every change the name of the image, change the location of the image task that I've been talking about thus far, we need SIG releases input on whether it is appropriate to cherry pick back all of these image renames to previous patches or patch releases of Kubernetes. I personally would prefer to pick that back so that every supported release of Kubernetes, like the latest patch release of every supported version of Kubernetes, pulls from community-owned infrastructure. However, I could see the case being made that there are some people who like set up for air gap testing of their clusters who feel like the change in image names means a change in which images they needed to pre-pull to set up their cluster for air gap testing and whatnot. So I could anticipate some pushback based on that. So I feel like that's something for SIG release to mull over. Like generally, I do feel like we pick back test changes if the test is like a bug fix, or if it happens to be picking up a security change. And in some sense, I could view the images that are used under test just being another test change. But we should consider that in the context of like what kind of deprecation window do we want for all of these, because you know, we're going to try really hard to keep all these projects around for as long as is needed, but it'd be super helpful if we didn't have to keep them around for a super long time. Let me see here. Same thing for Node E2E images. Do tests use this? If so, we should migrate the images that are used. If they don't, we can probably delete this. That's everything I have linked off this issue. Sort of related, we also want to stop using images that come from docker.io. I think the Kubernetes project CI has been sufficiently protected from rate limiting, but I feel like there are other sub-projects or other downstream consumers who occasionally hit rate limiting. And so I believe we have a staging mirror project set up for all these images. And Claudio, I think you've also been involved in trying to migrate these over in the same way that we're migrating the E2E test images over.
Yeah, basically it's using the same image building and promoting process as the other E2E test images that we've previously discussed. Already have a pull request for that sent. It just adds some empty Docker files, so no up Docker files into Kubernetes test images, and would just need then to be approved and then simply promoted and then replaced in the Kubernetes test utils manifest. There has been some other rate limits being hit on Docker Hub. I got a comment on the pull request that I sent mentioning this, that someone hit those rate limits. So maybe it would be a good idea to decide on the implementation, whether to go forward with my solution or wait for another one.
Okay, I still feel like I had a lot of concern about whether or not we should be mirroring images before. I don't really think I have that concern as much anymore. I think we should just go ahead and mirror, because mirroring images means our downstream users and consumers of Kubernetes would also benefit from this. If there are other issues with other images from other sub-projects, yeah, we should chat about that. I view that as less critical to accomplish within the 121 milestone. But please send them over to Kate's infra, or sorry, yeah, sorry, send them to SIG testing if they're having problems. Okay, I'm just gonna pause there because I've been talking a lot. I want to hear from folks who showed up wanting to help out? I see a hand from Hippie.
One of the things on our commitments for Q1 is the migrating of the images. And I've reached out to a couple folks, but I wanted to see in this wider group of humans, as we do all of this work to migrate to cates.gcr.io, and we're noticing rate limits, somewhat uneven building the images that we're mirroring over. A lot of our infrastructure costs coming over from the Cates Infra Working Group are related to the pulling of those images. Somewhat the storage, but more heavily the actual continual pulling. So we as a community can totally understand why Docker said, yeah, we need the rate limit. And our costs are going to start soaring as we continue to migrate all of the remaining pieces of the Kubernetes infrastructure, Kubernetes focusing just on this image pulling issue. And with the choice of using the cates.gcr.io, that piece of componentry as far as using that domain name and pointing to Google, what is there anybody within Google, or maybe as far as how we might thinking about ways that we could distribute that to be more pushed towards where our consumers are, similar to a CDN or similar to some type of distributed caching that would help us alleviate the heavy hits we have towards the non-rate limited but heavily funded distribution of all the beautiful artifacts that our community produces.
So I view this more as a concern for the Cates Infra Working Group, but yes, I feel like rallying the CNCF and the major players who participate around sort of mirroring and spreading the cost of hosting images here is the long-term sustainable way of solving this problem. In the short term, I was sort of really concerned about bad actors abusing cates.gcr.io and pulling way more than they should. I'm less concerned about that at the moment, but I do believe that we will want to sort of get reporting to understand like which images are causing the most traffic and thus costing the most to host. And then from there, we can sort of decide, you know, who is it most appropriate to seek out for additional funding or whatever. So I think we can look at it both in terms of you know, who's pulling these images, and also in terms of which images are getting pulled the most. But I feel like that is a concern that can be solved orthogonally from migrating the community over to it. If that makes sense.
Okay. If there's anyone that's also Google here, I've reached out to a couple of folks for the logging, and I've not had any success so far. So that's another area. I could maybe bring that over to the working group, but I figured we're
sure. That's primarily a Tim Hawken and Justin Santa Barbara thing. If you haven't reached out to them directly, I would do so. If you have and they haven't been responsive, I will poke them again on your behalf.
Thanks, Aaron. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a silly question. When I talk about moving images over to community-owned infrastructure, do you all know what that means and how to do that?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. When I talk about moving images over to like cates.gcr.io, do people here understand the steps involved in doing that. I'm basically trying to understand, like, for all the issues that I walked through, I can tag them all as help wanted, but I could use others' perspective on whether there's sufficient instructions in those issues to make you feel comfortable enough to take those on.
For me, I think the main question is like how to migrate existing images from one side to another. For new ones, I know the process, but for existing ones, I have no idea.
So Ben linked the Kate's GCR.io docs. Let's see if that's helpful. Yeah, I totally hear you. I feel like the way I've solved that in the past, let's see if the word migrate shows up here. It does not. Yeah, I think this is really good about describing how to set up a new repo. For migrating things over, the way I've done it is kind of as a human being. I have Docker pulled from the old place and then Docker pushed to the new place. That's very easily scriptable. And I don't have a huge problem with a human being doing that. I think that's sort of why when we set up groups for all the staging projects, like these human beings can manually push images directly to the repo. It's not like automation is the only thing that can push images to the staging repos. Automation is the only thing that can promote from the staging repos to kates.gcr.io. So I feel like this empowers you to write a script to push from one place to the other. But it is a common problem. I know that release engineering is kind of taking ownership of the container image promoter. I guess I kind of wonder if there's a way you could like as a one shot or possibly as a job or something, you could point the container image promoter at the old repo and have it promote into the staging repo. That could be a cool way of doing some reuse, but I don't know if the cost of figuring that out and the benefits that that provides is like less than I'll just quickly script it this one time.
I have a question about this task.
Yes.
Just to kind of make sure that I understand it, because it sounds like you're describing like a one-time script that a human would go in and take the image from the old place and copy it to the new place, and then the task is done. But when you first mentioned migrating images from the old repository to the new repository, I thought that would involve like either going into the Bazel target or something, and instead of having the infrastructure push to this repository, we are pushing to this other repository, and now that other repository is up to date, and then we move the references from the old one to the new one. Is it sufficient to just copy them once and then say, here is the new?
It is basically,
or will that fall out of
it's basically both. So like, I guess the algorithm is like, if there doesn't already exist a staging project for these images, and there isn't already a CI job that automatically builds and pushes these images to a staging project, there should be. If there already is, but older images haven't made it over, let's do the backfill. And then update the code and tests to use the new images and make sure that the tests still work. That's most likely more relevant for tests like the Kate's Authenticated test or the Authenticated image pulling test, which might need credential stuff set up. I will try and link it to the relevant thing, but Claudio, since you brought it up, I do think migrating all the E2E test images over, we ended up creating like a new GCP job for each test image, so that when you merge a pull request to Kubernetes, only the image that you update will get built and pushed. But to sort of kick this process off, you and a couple other folks submitted PRs that kind of changed all of them at once, which caused us to try and trigger a bunch of GCP jobs at once. And we hit quota for GCP. And so I did some digging, and the quota limits that we hit are internal service quotas. So they're not things that I can change. I can only lower the quota, and I don't think that's what you want me to do. So I linked dashboards that should be visible to anybody who's in the K10 Prow viewers group, that show the quota requests that Prow is hitting. So this shows sort of the trend of get traffic over time. And then this bottom graph here shows every time that we bump into quota for that. So what this tells me is today, I think we use one central service account called GCB Builder. And I think that service account lives inside of the like Prow's project. And perhaps what we want to consider doing is switching to a service account for each staging project, because the staging projects are where the builds actually run. And then the people who have ownership of those staging projects, the human beings in those staging groups, can view things like this. I'm proving that this works by clicking on this from my personal non-Google laptop. And you can see the concurrent builds and API requests for Cloud Build or any other service that your project happens to use. And so, yeah, we did hit our quota of 10 concurrent builds when we tried to build all the E2E test images at once on Wednesday, the 20th. There's not a whole lot I can do about concurrent builds other than like they get queued up and throttled, and they should eventually execute. And if the image builder tool doesn't support that or is breaking for some reason because of that, we should look at how to make the image builder tool more robust.
Yeah, I had no idea about this, sorry. For what it's worth, we won't have to do this anytime soon because most of the images are rarely built.
Yeah.
The most commonly built image is the agnostic image.
Yeah. And
after that, maybe the kitten and Nautilus image, maybe, I'm not sure, but 90% agnostic, 10% maybe the rest of the images. So it shouldn't be an issue in the future.
I agree. I feel like this, I don't view so much as a pain point because it was a one-time thing and that was kind of annoying. Let's see if I can see it for Proud Build Trusted. I can. I have to go to Cloud Build. Quotas. And if I look over the last 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, this I see as more of a problem because this traffic's not really going away. And we seem to be having it more frequently. So we'll look into that. I've basically run out of time. I apologize for that. What I was going to say is for sort of the remaining help wanted stuff that happens to be relevant to release engineering when it comes to migrating stuff for Kate's Infra. There's a WG Kate's Infra project board. I've got things split up into 2 backlogs. One is for things we need to do to our existing infra that we've already migrated over to better support the community. So like make sure that the container image promoter pre-submit job validates that people don't try to move tags or whatever. And then all of the stuff around migrating stuff over. So all the projects that I walked through just now are in the info to migrate column. Oh, here's another one real quick. Kate's test images. This project is where random images that are built for tools and components and test info live. It is also where all the images that are used in our Proud Jobs live. So Kubekins, for example, lives in Kate's test images. I would really like to see us move this over to a community-owned subproject. I believe with Kubekins especially, this is going to raise the question of the general push to staging and then promote to kates.gcr.io workflow. I'm not sure we're going to want to do that for Kubekins. And we'll want to consider how moving these images over, making sure that that works with the auto bumper job that automatically updates like every job in test infra to use the latest version of whatever images are used there. But I think this is also very reasonable to accomplish within the 121 timeframe. All right, I'm sorry, y'all. I feel like I did a lot of talking, so I don't know how useful this was for everybody. My goal was to get a sense for who wants to work on what, and if you feel like you know what to do. So as you have questions, please reach out on SIG Testing or Kate's Infra, or ping me on Slack, and I'll work through all that. Any other last remaining thoughts or questions? Okay. Thank you all for your time. It's been great to see you all. I hope you have a happy Tuesday and a great 2 weeks. I'll see you again.
Thanks, Sarah.
Take it easy.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.